The invocation will be given by the Reverend Mr. Chester W. Crump, minister of the University Christian Church.
Shall we pray? Our Father in heaven, who would have imagined that when we were juniors a year ago we'd be standing here today, ready to graduate? But we're glad we're here, and for whatever we're receiving, we give thee thanks. And just one simple prayer I would offer on behalf of these. Help them, Lord, in one respect by just making them joyous because of this occasion today. Secondly, help them do their part to make it a better world in which we can all live. And then finally, make yourself known to them and to each of us in a very personal way. For we ask it in the name of the Christ. Amen.
Graduates, members of the faculty, parents, relatives, and friends, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this 59th commencement of Ball State University. The music today is being provided by the University Symphony Band under the direction of Mr. Dean DePoy of our music faculty. The singing of the national anthem was led by Mr. Lemuel Anderson, also of our music faculty. I again acknowledge the participation of the Reverend Mr. Crump, who gave the invocation. We are particularly pleased to have a number on the platform with us today, and among them are three of the members of our Ball State University Board of Trustees. I would ask the trustees to stand as their names are called, and I would ask the audience to withhold their applause until all have been introduced. First of all, Dr. Alexander M. Bracken of Muncie, President of the Board of Trustees. Mr. Will Parker of Muncie, Secretary of the Board of Trustees. Mrs. Robert O'Malley of Richmond, Assistant Secretary of the Board of Trustees. These three folks, along with Mr. Richard Wells, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, who is an ex officio member, and Mr. George Stevens of Plymouth, who is Vice President of the Board of Trustees, are the folks who dedicate considerable time and energy to the work of this university. Unfortunately, Mr. Wells and Mr. Stevens are unable to be with us, but they do extend their greetings. Would you please join me in recognizing our trustees? Others on the platform I should like to recognize at this time, and again, I would ask you to hold your applause until all have been introduced. Dr. Donald Nelson of the Eli Lilly Company of Indianapolis, who is president of the Ball State University Alumni Association. Dr. Merrill C. Byrow, vice president for Student Affairs and dean of students. Dr. Oliver C. Bum, vice president for Public Affairs and University Development. Dr. Richard W. Burkhardt, vice president for Instructional Affairs and dean of faculty. Dr. Joseph C. Wagner, vice president for Business Affairs and treasurer. Dr. Victor B. Lawhead, dean of undergraduate programs. Dr. Robert H. Kenker, dean of the graduate school. And Major John A. Steen, assistant professor of aerospace studies. Now I would invite you to express appreciation for these persons present on the platform. Thank you. We are very much privileged today to have as our speaker Mr. John A. Scott, editor and publisher of the Lafayette Journal and Courier. Born in Connecticut, he moved to Indiana with his family at the age of 12 and was graduated from South Bend Central High School. Mr. Scott was graduated cum laude from the University of Notre Dame. He also completed advanced studies at his alma mater and at Indiana University, Purdue University, and American University. A former teacher of English and a school administrator, Mr. Scott began his newspaper career with the South Bend Tribune. Prior to moving to Lafayette, he served for 5 years as vice president of the Elkhart Truth. In addition to his present responsibilities as editor and publisher of the Journal and Courier, Mr. Scott is vice president for operations and a director of Federated Publications Incorporated. His efforts in his business and professional life, though they are extensive, are not the whole of his contribution to his society. He believes in community and public service. As a matter of fact, he does more than believe in it, he performs. Mayor of South Bend, Young Man of the Year in that city in 1949, United Fund campaign chairman in Lafayette, director of several civic and philanthropic agencies, member of various state commissions, a consultant to the United States Commission on Civil Rights, an active member of several professional societies in the newspaper field, winner of the George Washington Medal from the Freedom Foundation. These are but some of his accomplishments and contributions. A frequent speaker, a perceptive and thoughtful person, a man dedicated to his tasks and our society, a properly demanding friend of education. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased and honored to present Mr. John A. Scott, who will speak to us on the subject, For Value Received. Mr. Scott.
Dr. Pruis, distinguished guests, 1970 graduates, faculty of Ball State University, families and friends of the university, in acknowledging the generous introduction of the president of the university, I should also point out to you that today I come to you from the depths of the generation gap. I am the father of 4 children. 2 of them are married in their 20s, one of them here at Ball State. One of them is 13 and the other 3. We have a child every decade at our house. This is what they mean by the challenging 70s. As Indiana's most conspicuous do-it-yourself grandfather, I'd like to try to bridge the generation gap briefly today with an allusion to the younger children in our home who in the backyard one day said, "Come on, Daddy, let's climb the tree." And I said, "I can't climb the tree. I'm too old." And in a burst of compassion that enveloped me in one phrase, the child said, "You're not old, Daddy. You're new." And what he was saying also, that everything is new. The only thing that is old is an idea that refuses to perish. Since you've come in here today, drama is unfolding at Dulles International Airport as a hijacker has taken a plane and made it land in Washington with 51 passengers aboard. And at this very moment, the airport is surrounded by FBI agents and camera crews and reporters wondering whether those people will survive. There is word out of the Greek islands this very moment that Jackie and Mr. Onassis have called off the big party they had scheduled, and tongues are wagging tonight. President Nixon told a group of college students a couple of hours ago that the Middle East is a bubble that might burst any minute. Everything is new. Nothing is old. A commencement is new, and one of its paradoxes is that very few of you really take the word commencement with much semantic seriousness. A commencement is generally regarded as an ending rather than a beginning, the severance of a phase in life, the finish of an experience in higher education. Actually, as someone put it, today really is the first day of the rest of your life. The value received here at Ball State is taken to mean an accumulation of skills or knowledge, an arrival at a state of readiness, the certified possession of equipment for the long haul. If this were ever true at Ball State, it's true no more. For what you mainly carry away from here, if the idea of coming in the first place works, is a compelling curiosity, an inquiring skepticism, a challenging intellect, and the will to seek truth, knowing that the truth is elusive and sometimes a fugitive from the phonies who would destroy it. There is no use kidding yourself that years at Ball State were serene years for American universities. Campuses have gone through a period of turmoil, dissent, and even death. In all the dialogue and retrospect about the nationwide violences of this last semester, however, there are some historical realities that have been obscured by the noise. One of these realities that is most important to you, and that is that the goals of the dissenters, the pure and ultimate objectives, were for the most part laudable ones and desirable. There were revolutionaries who clouded these objectives by demanding the overthrow of the government. There were those who chased anarchy for rebellion's sake. But now on June 4th, it is possible to reflect that peace and justice were what most students were really after. And what generation or what people have not sought or at least dreamed of peace and justice? It is tragic that violence emerged as a substitute for dissent and a response to it. But who can say that the pressure generated on campuses will not in the long haul contribute to our greater fulfillment of the American dream? By now, the academic environment has given you a message, namely, that in a free society, change and progress and reform are not self-generative. They are accomplished in response to pressure. In this century, save for war, the most dramatic pressures for reform have been generated by organized labor. Some of the taken for granted results of labor union pressure have been shorter work days and weeks, overtime pay, pension plans, and health insurance. So successful have been the reforms achieved by organized labor that many people now want to reform organized labor. Racial justice is being accomplished under pressure. It's naive to think otherwise. The majority of humans simply do not freely spring out of their greed and selfishness to share their freedom and abundance. And while we hesitate to say it, in Muncie and Delaware County even, most united funds and community chests are required to exert some form of pressure to persuade individuals to share their bounty with the less fortunate. Environmental pollution has been increasing for a long time, but pressure only recently has compelled the sinners to become penitent and start cleaning up our planet. To suggest that the automobile industry in a free economy voluntarily would spend millions in research to replace the combustion engine is like cafeteria would improve if only the students would not complain about it. In my own field of journalism, we are presently under enormous pressure. It is common to blame this on the Vice President of the United States, but this is an easy transfer of blame by uneasy journalists. I did not enjoy Mr. Agnew's rhetoric when he attacked the news media, and I would have preferred that he include the excesses of some of the conservative newspapers when he zeroed in on the New York Times. But any fair newspaper man would have to confess that the Vice President reflected an epidemic of disbelief on the part of the American public when it comes to the news media. A Lewis Harris survey for Time magazine last year, an Associated Press managing editor survey, a Gallup poll, and a recent sampling by CBS graphically illustrate the credibility problem that exists between you and me. Harris found that 2 out of 3 persons in his sample felt that television was more fair than newspapers, but by a ratio of 3 to 1, they believed the television camera could lie. The APME survey ranked the major causes of public distrust as inaccuracies in elementary facts, evidence of editorial prejudice by the placement of stories or the size of the headlines, and half-told or misleading stories due to inadequate research and background. Dr. Gallup reported that only 37% of you believe that newspapers deal fairly with all sides. The CBS random telephone poll showed a majority favoring restrictions on press criticism of government and other limitations of freedom of the press. This scares me, and I want to make up with you. There are dozens of other specific illustrations that reflect this disbelief. To this day, there are millions of citizens who refuse to believe that a massacre occurred at My Lai, or that the police in Chicago overreacted at the Democratic National Convention, or even that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated President Kennedy. Because Vice President Agnew articulated this credibility gap, and some say he's exploiting it, we in the media have overreacted with alarm and outcry and allegations that Mr. Agnew is a threat to freedom of the press. Spiro Agnew is no more a threat to freedom of the press than H.L. Mencken, a newspaper man, was when he said, "Newspapers never defend anything or anybody if they can help it. If the job is forced upon them, they tackle it by denouncing something or someone else." Or, Spiro Agnew is no more a threat to freedom of the press than 12 presidents of the United States who have cursed specific newspapers, while at the same time preserving the institution of a free press without censorship. Vice President Agnew has been responsible for thousands of hours of self-appraisal, and it may turn out that the pressure he generated is healthy. He certainly has encouraged the television networks to be more thorough and objective in their news analyses and commentaries on speeches that may affect not only Americans but all mankind. A case in point occurred last evening when television analysts were careful to point out that they had received the text of President Nixon's speech an hour in advance, suggesting that the critical response was not impulsive. Even then, Eric Severide, the most erudite of them all, missed an appendix to the speech and performed a goof for all to see. One of television's problems certainly is lack of innovation. The Columbia Broadcasting System and the National Broadcasting Company offer the same anchorman with the same format that has satisfied the audiences in days of yore, now into a second generation. Walter Cronkite, Chet Huntley, David Brinkley, they represent television's generation gap. And whereas their cynicism in the early days had an amusing and startling effect, the years have stereotyped them in the mold of sarcasm. With tens of millions of Americans watching news on television, the process has become too important to be turned over to announcers who try to substitute their wit and scorn for a simple verbal report to accompany the picture. What television seems to be doing is trying to influence events rather than to report them. In newspaper language, this is called slanting the story. When the media are directed toward the general public, the practice in a free society is reprehensible. You, the readers or viewers, are supposed to be given the facts and place upon them your value judgment. Nor are the newspapers guiltless when it comes to neglect or to excess. We tend to view our protection under the First Amendment as proprietary, whereas the protection is yours, not mine. It is the people's right to know, not my right to tell you, that has the primacy in our free order. Today's newspapers are in an era of diminished glory, but they will come back and are coming back. But the great investigative reporting is passing by attrition to other media. Today, the mayors of San Francisco and St. Louis aren't complaining or suing their daily newspapers, they're suing Look and Life. While the wire services like AP and United Press are essential to freedom of information, as are the television networks, none of them broke the My Lai massacre story, That Pulitzer Prize was won on the domestic front by a reporter who got his leaks inside the United States. The reporters held prisoners this week by the Viet Cong are not newspaper reporters, they're from NBC and CBS. In the newspaper business, then, we have problems we must solve, and you will demand that we produce better newspapers as you go into the marketplace and become more concerned with the media that you read and that your children begin to read 10 and 20 years from now. And while we publishers pride ourselves on our emancipation from the influence of advertisers and government, we often surrender to news staffs who are able to create impressions with the way they write the news. Moreover, the news of riots and war and earthquakes and evil permeate our pages, leading our readers to wonder if we have anything good at all to report. It was ever thus. Sophocles in 450 B.C. said, quote, "None love the messenger who brings bad news." And Shakespeare paraphrased him later with, quote, "The first bringer of unwelcome news hath but a losing office, and his tongue sounds ever after as a sullen bell." There have been kings who would receive bad news from the troops in the field from a messenger, and they would respond by executing the messenger. Nobody likes bad news. Today, the news media are being challenged along with most of our free institutions. Daniel Boorstin sees the current self-flagellations as part of a natural society that could start a revival for setting new goals for all of us. You setting new goals for all of us. No matter what the psychological reasons, your young adulthood will be defining and seeking new goals. It would be absurd to suggest that the communication business will be or should be immune to the impact of this historical cycle. From another point of view, the media not only react to the public, they are partners with pressure, and we want to be your partners. The reformers during your career at Ball State have included Martin Luther King, Ralph Nader, and Robert Kennedy. Without a forum, without radio, television, and newspapers, they would have been minor characters on our national stage. In a closed society, they never would have become visible to the majority of the population. Their protests would have been suppressed, and all three would have spent most of their adult lives in jail cells. These independent intelligences would not be exposed to the multitudes, for dictatorships do not permit the illumination of anti-establishment ideas. But in the United States, the exchange of free ideas is so accepted as a way of life that the media are now sandwiched between the passions of the left and the right. On the right are those who say we print too much and inflame the passions of the militants, and on the left are those who scream that we don't tell it like it is, and they turn to underground trash to tell what they perceive to be reality. My plea today is simply that you protect the middle, the moderate part of the political spectrum which seeks neither suppression nor revolution. That part which protects freedom of the press, not against Spiro Agnew or Eldridge Cleaver, but against you and me. For should we ever lose our liberty in the United States, the signal will be on the air, on your television sets and in your newspapers. The word is censorship, and its handmaiden is disaster. Our First Amendment will also be our first casualty if we ever begin to yield our liberty. I'll make a deal with you if you buy my contention that today's indictments of the media are antique and repeat the old grievances and frustrations of those who wish conditions were different, and I promise to change. I'll buy the notion that you're the greatest. Listen to this indictment of your age group. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We are unsettled to the fiery roots of our being. There isn't a human relation, whether parent or child, husband and wife, worker and employer, that doesn't move in a strange situation. We are not used to this complicated civilization, and we don't know how to behave when personal contact and eternal authority have disappeared. There are no precedents to guide us, no wisdom that wasn't meant for a simpler age. We have changed our environment more quickly than we know how to change ourselves. That was written by Walter Lippmann in 1914. Listen to this one. We live in a decadent age. Young people no longer respect their parents. They're rude and impatient. They inhabit taverns and have no self-control. When did this evaluation take place? 6,000 years ago. It's the inscription on an Egyptian tomb. So the basic times do not change much. There was a generation gap long before the time of Christ. There were people like you, and I hope me, seeking to close it. Times do not change as much as they appear to change in the endless cycle of history. But you have now a new decade to work with. Most of you will help lead America into a new century, making real your dreams, exploding through the dimensions of today, generating the pressures that will make the future exciting and fulfilling. And starting on this first day of the rest of your life, may your years be merry and bright.
Mr. Scott, that applause will indicate that you were incorrect in one thing. You said the introduction was generous. It was not. It wasn't enough. We appreciate your remarks, sir, and truly hope that commencement in 1970 is not the end, but a real beginning. At this time, I will ask Vice President Burkhardt to present the graduating class.
The Dean of Undergraduate Programs, Dr. Victor B. Lawhead, will present the candidates for associate and baccalaureate degrees.
Will the candidates for the degree Associate in Arts please rise? Will the candidates for the degree Associate in Science please rise? Thank you.
Mr. President, as Vice President for Instructional Affairs and Dean of Faculty, I present to you as candidates for degrees those who on or before this day have completed or have a reasonable expectation of completing all of the stated requirements for their respective associate degrees. I present the candidates in absentia and those who stand before you.
Upon the recommendation of the faculty that you have or will have completed the courses required for graduation, and that you have proven yourselves worthy of the honor of graduation, and by the authority vested in the Board of Trustees and delegated to me, I hereby confer upon you the associate degrees which you have earned, with all the rights, privileges, and obligations pertaining thereto.
Will the graduates be seated?
You will note that the candidates for the baccalaureate degrees, those on the dean's list, by virtue of their point ratio of 3.6 or better, and those having graduated on the honors program, are wearing red and white honors cords. Will you please stand and be recognized? You may be seated. Will the candidates for the degree Bachelor of Arts please rise? Will the candidates for the degree Bachelor of Science please rise?
Mr. President, as Vice President for Instructional Affairs and Dean of Faculty, I present to you as candidates for degrees those who on or before this day have completed all or have a reasonable expectation of completing all of the stated requirements for their respective baccalaureate degrees. I present the candidates in absentia and those who stand before you.
Upon the recommendation of the faculty that you have or will have completed the courses required for graduation, and that you have proven yourselves worthy of the honor of graduation, and by the authority vested in the Board of Trustees and delegated to me, I hereby admit you to the company of educated men and women, and confer on you the degrees for which you are competent, with all the rights, privileges, and obligations pertaining thereto, of which the diplomas issued by the university shall forever be the testimony.
Will the graduates be seated? The Dean of the Graduate School, Dr. Robert H. Kenker, will present the candidates for graduate degrees.
In the interest of expediency, the master's candidates are already hooded. Will the candidates for the degree Master of Science please rise? You may be seated. Will the candidates for the degree Master of Music please rise? You may be seated. Will the candidates for the degree Master of Business Administration please rise? You may be seated. Will the candidates for the degree Master of Library Science please rise? You may be seated. Will the candidates for the degree Master of Arts in Education please rise? You may be seated. Will the candidates for the degree Master of Arts please rise? You may be seated.
Mr. President, as Vice President for Instructional Affairs and Dean of Faculty, I present to you as candidates for degrees those who, on or before this day, have completed or have a reasonable expectation of completing all of the stated requirements for their respective master's degrees. I present the candidates in absentia and those who stand before you.
I'd like to see them in one group. Would the master's candidates please rise? Upon the recommendation of the faculty that you have completed the courses required for graduation, and that you have proved yourselves worthy of the honor of graduation, and that you have accomplished with distinction the first stage of graduate study, now by the authority vested in the Board of Trustees and delegated to me, I confer on you the degrees for which you are competent, with all the rights, honors, privileges, and obligations pertaining thereto.
Will the graduates be seated?
Will the candidate for the degree Specialist in Education please rise? Will the candidate for the degree Doctor of Philosophy please rise? Will the candidates for the degree Doctor of Education please rise?
Mr. President, as Vice President for Instructional Affairs and Dean of Faculty, I present to you as candidates for degrees those who, on or before this day, have completed all of the stated requirements for their respective advanced degrees. I present the candidates in absentia and those who stand before you.
Upon the recommendation of the faculty that you have completed the courses and work required for graduation, that you have proven yourselves worthy of the honor of graduation, and that you have reached scholarly attainment with high distinction in your field, now by the authority vested in the Board of Trustees and delegated to me, I confer on you the advanced graduate degrees for which you are competent, with all the rights, honors, and privileges and obligations pertaining thereto. We have high hopes for your futures as members of the ancient and universal company of scholars.
Graduates with advanced degrees will proceed to the platform and cross as their names are called and will be invested with symbols of their degrees. One candidate has qualified for the degree Specialist in Education. James Miller Weaver. Nineteen candidates have qualified for the degree Doctor of Education at Ball State University, and they will now receive the symbols of their degrees. Dr. Charles Walter Burkhardt, Superintendent and Principal, Kewanna Public School, Kewanna, Indiana. Dr. Frances Marion Horn, in absentia, Associate Professor of Education, Radford College, Radford, Virginia. Dr. Ruth Howard, Indianapolis, Indiana. Dr. Byron Eugene Key, Administrative Assistant to the President, Thornton Junior College, Thornton Community College, Harvey, Illinois. Dr. Nedra K. Kinnerk, Assistant Professor of Education, Indiana University, Kokomo, Indiana. Dr. Janice Elaine Koldau, in absentia, Assistant Professor of Psychology, Wisconsin State University, Superior, Wisconsin. Dr. Ernest Ralph Lanza, in absentia, Assistant Professor of Psychology, Alfred University, Alfred, New York. Dr. Harry Calvin Mayhew, Assistant Professor of Education, Moorhead State University, Moorhead, Kentucky. Dr. Paul Maza, Associate Professor of Elementary Education and Director of the Roland Laboratory School, Shippensburg State College, Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. Dr. Ronald Lee Michael, Associate Professor of Social Science, Anthropology, California State College, California, Pennsylvania. Dr. James Ham Moss, Assistant Professor of Elementary Education, Northern Illinois University, DeKalb, Illinois. Dr. Richard Wayne Olson, Assistant Professor of Biology, Ball State University, Muncie, Indiana. Dr. David Lee Rush, Assistant Professor of Educational Administration, Eastern Kentucky University, Richmond, Kentucky. Dr. Gene Frederick Stearns, Associate Professor of Education, Western Michigan University, Kalamazoo, Michigan. Dr. Ralph Edward Stuckman, Assistant Professor of Education, Wright State University, Dayton, Ohio. Dr. Gary Lou Wiesner, Assistant Superintendent, Marion Community Schools, Marion, Indiana. Dr. John Donald Weinhold, Assistant Professor of Science Education, Concordia Teachers College, Seward, Nebraska. Dr. William Harold Weltner, in absentia, Assistant Professor of Elementary Education, Colorado State College, Greeley, Colorado. Dr. Arthur Frank Zakaria, in absentia, Principal, Tremont Elementary School, Patchogue Medford Public School, Patchogue, New York. 2 candidates have qualified for the degree Doctor of Philosophy. Dr. Frederick Gene Miller, Assistant Professor of Education, Western Illinois University, Macomb, Illinois. Dr. Edward John Plouffe, in absentia, Assistant Professor of History, St. Cloud State College, St. Cloud, Minnesota. The honorary degree of Doctor of Laws is now to be awarded to Mr. Richard D. Irwin. President Pruis will read the citation.
Higher education and the business world owe much to you, Richard Dorsey Irwin, textbook publisher, for your contributions to the improvement and advancement of college textbook publishing. Your initiative and leadership in this field and your discriminating selection of the best authors have made your company, Richard D. Irwin Incorporated, unique in the field of publishing textbooks in business, economics, the behavioral, and the social sciences. Most Irwin books are leaders in their respective fields. Better books and better teaching aids are now available to thousands of college students in most of the 2,600 colleges and universities in the United States because of your high standards. Now translated into many languages, your textbooks are also widely used in many foreign countries. As founder and director of the Richard D. Irwin Foundation, you are encouraging promising young business candidates to study for the Doctor of Philosophy and Doctor of Business Administration degrees by providing attractive scholarships for collegiate graduate study. A native of St. Joseph, Missouri, you were graduated from the University of Illinois in 1927. You started your productive career in the publishing field as manager of the college department of the A.W. Shaw Company, Chicago, and as an editorial director and manager in the business division of McGraw-Hill Book Company, New York. With a great deal of optimism and business acumen, you launched your own company, Richard D. Irwin Incorporated, in 1933, a year when college enrollments were low and dollars to buy books were not plentiful. You remember that. Yeah. So successful has your venture into the publishing industry become that you have organized 5 new publishing companies in the past 11 years. Interested in public education as well as higher education, you have been a member of the school board for District 161 in your home community of Flossmoor, Illinois, and you serve as a trustee of the Glenwood School for Boys in Glenwood, Illinois. Philanthropist, civic and community leader, wise and skillful business leader, publisher, and educator, we recognize you for your contributions to higher education. Ball State University is honored to confer upon you, Richard Dorsey Irwin, the degree of Doctor of Laws with all the rights and privileges thereunto appertaining.
Thank you,
Doctor.
It's a real pleasure.
The honorary degree of Doctor of Laws is now to be awarded to Mr. Benjamin V. Cohen. Dr. Pruis will read the citation.
A source of great pride to a community is frequently one of its own who has gone forth to serve the nation and the world. You, Benjamin Victor Cohen, one of the nation's finest legal architects of far-reaching social and economic reforms, economist, barrister in the World Court, confidant and counselor to presidents, and devotee to the cause of international understanding, have been appropriately recognized for your brilliant but selfless contributions to the cause of justice and equity for all mankind. Your home community of Muncie, Indiana, and Ball State University join countless thousands in paying tribute to you for your humanitarianism and your fidelity to your country and its people, in war and in peace, for more than 20 years and 10. Born in Muncie in 1894, you were educated in the Muncie and the Chicago public schools, the University of Chicago, and Harvard University. Your remarkable legal career started in 1916 as secretary to a United States Circuit Court judge and as counsel for the American Zionists at peace conferences in London and Paris. After a successful law career in New York City, you went to Washington, D.C. in 1933 as one of the wisest and most able of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's brain trusts. You played a major role in shaping legislative reforms affecting securities, exchanges, and utility holdings, in establishing minimum wage guarantees, and in working throughout World War II to maintain a non-inflationary civilian economy. A selfless and devoted public servant, you worked closely and quietly with James F. Burns in the offices of Economic Stabilization and War Mobilization, and helped initiate the plan for Lend-Lease in the early years of the war. Even before the guns of war were silenced, you were working constructively to help shape a durable system to ensure peace at Bretton Woods, Dumbarton Oaks, and the Berlin Conference, and later with the Council of Foreign Ministers in London, Moscow, Paris, and New York. You were senior advisor for the American delegation to the United Nations General Assembly between 1946 and 1952, and United States representative before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Among those intimately involved in the world political scene, the characteristics of altruism, selflessness, and modesty are rare qualities, but these you have had in abundance. Ball State University is indeed honored to confer upon you, Benjamin Victor Cohen, the degree of Doctor of Laws with all the rights and privileges thereunto appertaining. A son of Muncie, with several of his friends in the audience, I've asked Mr. Cohen if he would like to say just a few words to you.
Mr. President and friends, I am deeply grateful to be honored by this great institution of learning of my hometown, the city of my birth. It is good to be honored by this institution that I can remember in my youth as a struggling one-building normal school, and that I have seen grow from a little normal school to a great college and now a great university.
The honorary degree of Doctor of Laws is now to be awarded to Charles Stewart Mott. In Mr. Mott's absence, the degree will be accepted by Mr. Frank J. Manley, Executive Director of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation Project. Dr. Pruis will read the citation.
Mr. Manley, a longtime co-worker with Mr. Mott, I'm going to read this citation, of course, to Mr. Mott, and we're delighted, Mr. Manley, that you could be here. Richly blessed with a love for children and a deep concern for their welfare, an appreciation of the value of family life, a deep commitment to community, a rare understanding of the need for constructive use of leisure time, and a far-reaching perception of education's rich contribution to American life, you, Charles Stewart Mott, have shared your personal resources in order that children and adults may live a fuller and more productive life. In your 95 years, your life has touched thousands of children and adults in your home community of Flint, Michigan, and wherever the Mott concept of community education may be found. From the time of your graduation from Stevens Institute of Technology in 1897, with a degree in mechanical engineering, you have devoted your skills and your energy in an innovative and creative way. It is not surprising that the new General Motors Company, incorporated in 1908, invited you to share in what was to become a long and fruitful partnership for you and the company, a partnership that was to see you vice president of General Motors for 21 years. Your contributions to the city of Flint are legend. As three-time mayor of the city, you believed in involving its citizens in programs to improve their lives and to make Flint a better place in which to live. As founder of the Mott Foundation in 1926, you have provided financial incentives for community programs that are ultimately underwritten with public taxes, gifts, and United Fund money. You are the benefactor of countless cultural, philanthropic, and religious programs for the benefit of children, youth, and adults in Flint. The Mott concept of using existing school buildings during non-school hours for recreation, social, health, and education programs for children, youth, and adults is a unique contribution to community education in America. Ball State University is pleased to have a part in carrying on the Mott philosophy of community education and to extend this concept to other communities in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, made possible through the generosity of Mott Foundation funds. A plaque in the Mott Children's Health Center in Flint best epitomizes the philosophy which has undergirded your many philanthropies. We approach all problems of children with affection. They are the most wholesome part of the race, for they are the freshest from the hands of God. Ball State University salutes you, Charles Stewart Mott, public servant, industrialist, humanitarian, community educator. In recognition of your achievements and contributions to mankind, we are honored to confer upon you, Charles Stewart Mott, the degree of Doctor of Laws with all the rights and privileges thereunto appertaining. Would you present this to Mr. Mott, please? You honor.
Thank you very much, President Pruis. I'm sorry that Mr. Mott couldn't be here. He had another commitment. He was in New York City on Monday with the General Motors Board of Directors meeting. He's chairman of the board of the United States Sugar, which he presided over on Tuesday, and he had a special meeting in Bermuda today. That's the reason he can't be here. I'm just saying that so that you won't think I'm just trying to fill that generation gap that Mr. Scott talked about, Dr. Scott, pardon me, talked about. I will tell you one little anecdote that I think would be quite appropriate, and I think you graduates would like to hear it. Besides being a great man and worth $500 million and all that sort of thing, he's one of the most common, ordinary, everyday fellows you ever saw. Well, just the other day, we were down at Smith Bridgen's, one of the stores that he owns in Flint, and he was telling me something that he wanted to get done right away. And he had his finger in my face like this, and, you know, we're not going to live forever. Let's get going and let's get these things done. And so just then I could smell some perfume and powder and that sort of thing going around and back me. I couldn't see it, but I could smell her. And he was telling me, and he looked up and smiled sweetly, and he forgot what he was telling me. and then he said, "Oh, to be 75 again."
Upon the recommendation of Lieutenant Colonel E.S. Frazier, Jr. of the United States Air Force and Professor of Aerospace Studies here at the University, 16 cadets who have completed the prescribed courses at the University have been awarded commissions in the United States Air Force. Their names will now be read by the Dean of Undergraduate Programs, Dr. Victor Lawhead.
The first cadet has been commissioned in the United States Air Force. Robert Paul Jacober, Jr. The following cadets have been commissioned in the United States Air Force Reserve. Robert Allen Backmeyer, Charles William Bratna, David Lee Higgins, Jeffrey Lee Jernigan, Donald Keith Jones, Richard Patrick Powers, Jr., Ken Allen Romine, Paul Everett Schmidt, Timothy Patrick Spellman, Lawrence Joseph Swatner, Ray Leo Walton, Jr., Winton Lehman Weber, David Ricky Weist, Robert Eugene Whiteman, and Thomas Ray Wright.
To you, the June 1970 graduates of Ball State University, I would say only this. This evening you have joined the well over 30,000 men and women who have stood here in past years. This ceremony celebrates very properly your accomplishments as students of Ball State University. All of us here commend you and congratulate you for this significant accomplishment. But we also quickly add that our expectations of each of you are now the greater. You came to Ball State University to be students. We hope that you leave to become productive and responsible members of society. The outside world will not honor you for the degree or degrees you hold. It will honor only your contributions to that society. It expects you to do more than merely earn a living. It expects you to put your new knowledge and experience to work, and to work for the betterment of mankind, and it sorely needs you for that purpose. If the university has fulfilled its purpose, you will use your education in identifying and seeking to solve a wide variety of problems. And this will come about only as you become personally involved in and dedicated to serving your fellow man. Just a short while ago, a message came to my desk which was addressed to you, and I am pleased to read it. From the White House to the 1970 graduating class, Ball State University. You graduate at a time when established institutions and ideas are being questioned as they have never been questioned before in our history. Much of this questioning is being done by members of your generation, and it is your generation which ultimately will have to provide most of the answers to those questions. I hope that as you look for those answers, you will remember the obligation of every educated man and woman to draw careful distinctions between those ideas which must be readjusted and those which should be preserved. The fact that many accepted ways of thinking seem artificial and unjust does not warrant the rejection of all established standards, nor should our proper respect for the past and our legitimate desire for stability lead us to defend thoughtlessly that which is outmoded and obsolete. Your challenge will be that of reconciling continuity and change, of giving new applications and fresh expressions to our traditional values, especially our concern for the dignity and integrity of every individual. By meeting that challenge, you can make this time of rapid change a time of substantial growth and fulfillment for yourselves, for your community, and for your nation. As I extend to you my personal congratulations and best wishes, I look to the future with greater confidence because I know of the exceptional qualifications you bring to the exceptional demands of our time. Signed, Richard Nixon. There are hundreds, even I suspect thousands, examples of commitment to growth and fulfillment in our audience today. I am certain that there are husbands, there are wives and children, there are parents, perhaps brothers and sisters, and other relatives and friends who have sacrificed some of their own time and their own resources so that you might be in cap and gown today. And at this time, I'm going to ask these members of your family and your friends to rise so that you graduates might thank them for their efforts on your behalf with your applause. Would the parents and friends... Again, I'm certain I don't have to tell you, parents and husbands and wives and children and all, that the warmth of that applause indicates something very real. Then, too, graduates, may I, on your behalf, thank the faculty of this university and the staff and the trustees for their significant role in guiding you through the many experiences which have brought you to this place this evening. The strength and the reputation of any institution of higher education reside in large measure in the loyalty and in the performance of her alumni. We trust that you will be willing to serve Ball State through your continued interest and support. Perhaps our major vehicle of communication with you will be through the Alumni Association and its publications. We urge you to be an active member of that organization. We invite you to visit us whenever you can. We solicit your comments about our programs and our policies, for this is one of the best ways we have of evaluating what we are doing. We congratulate you for your past achievements, and we wish you well in your future endeavors. And now, to close these exercises, Professor Anderson will lead us in singing the Alma Mater. I would ask you to rise, please. Following the Alma Mater, the audience will please be seated during the recessional. But would you rise now, all of you, for the Alma Mater, please?